Welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few, US Pie's weekly podcast that empowers parents to reclaim their children's education from government bureaucrats and social engineers. In each episode, Sherry delivers the latest news from the front lines of the fight for the minds of the next generation, equipping you with the tools and resources needed to join the cause.
Hi everyone, welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. I'm your host, Sherry Few, and joining me today is an anonymous special guest, a seasoned educator and private tutor who's going to give us a candid behind-the-scenes look at what's really happening in today's government-run schools. Before we dive into our conversation, be sure to give us a 5-star rating or a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe and visit uspie.org to learn more and join the movement.
Today's episode is brought to you by U.S. parents involved in education. U.S. Pie's mission is to empower parents and local communities to break free from federal and national influences, thereby reclaiming parental authority over their children's education. For more insights from U.S. parents involved in education, connect with us at US Pie on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org.
Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. I'm your host, Sherry Few, and today's guest is someone who's speaking out about what's really happening inside government schools. And although she is no longer employed at the school where she taught in a low-income neighborhood, she's asked to remain anonymous due to fear of reprisal. So we're going to call her Susan. She's a seasoned educator and private tutor, and she's here to give us a candid behind-the-scenes look at the testing culture, screen time, internet exposure, and even teacher hiring practices in government-run schools. Susan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with the testing culture. So most parents think there's just one big test at the end of the year, but you say that's far from the truth. Can you help us understand just how often students are being tested and what impact this has on students and teachers?
Sure. So, like you said, most parents think there's only one big test at the end of the school year. And, the rest of the school year, you don't really think about it till the end of the year. But that's far from the truth. Basically, there are layers of tests, and they come from different categories. So there's layers of tests from the district, and then there are tests that the district wants you to take that are nationally standardized. And then there are for different subjects. Usually it's specifically for math and ELA, but certain grades will also include science and social studies if it's the grade that is being tested. If that grade is being tested at the end of the year with a state test. And so these smaller tests end up being really every few weeks that there's one of them will happen. And because they come every few weeks, there's usually a few days before that are used for prepping for that test. And then usually a day or two where the teacher takes time to go over some of the material on the test. And so if you think about that, how much time is actually being taken for prepping, taking the actual test, and reviewing the test, it ends up being literally every 2 weeks or so that they're taking some form of test. And oftentimes these tests, they will give them really unlimited amount of time. They'll say, try to finish it in one day, but if you don't, it's okay. And so we'll extend into the second day, and then if there's really a few more people left, okay, we'll let you take it the third day. And what that ends up doing is really disrupting the actual instructional time, because of course the teacher can't teach during those days, and the days where maybe half the class finished but the other class didn't. So then, I didn't want to teach new material when half the class is not there. And then, when this is happening so often, what essentially happens is the kids stop caring because it's just too much for anyone. They start guessing. Okay, it creates a culture of guessing. And I had kids who would literally straight up tell me, I guessed. or I sometimes I tell them, "You did really great," and they'd be like, "Oh, I guessed." Um, and, so it creates apathy, it creates a culture of guessing. And then, for the kids who do care, and they are not necessarily doing well, a lot of our students, and I'll discuss this a little bit later, they're not on grade level, they're not reading on grade level, and so they struggle, and so they get bad grades on these tests, bad scores. And so it's just this source of frustration and anxiety and failure, like in front of them regularly, and of course the schools are being measured on how the students do on these tests, so there's a lot of pressure from the district on the principals, and then the principals put that pressure on the teachers, and then that pressure goes down to the students. So it's really this this chain of pressure that people are putting on the person right below them, for the kids to perform, 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 perform. Um, and so, again, that just creates. I towards the end of the year, I called it. I said, "This is not public schooling. This is public testing." That's literally what we're doing here. We're just we're testing the kids. We're not really teaching them. We're spending most of
Mm.
our time testing them. And we don't even have time to do any kind of any topic in true depth and cover it sufficiently because, oh, it's time for testing.
Wow. That sounds extremely stressful. And, I think parents have been concerned about testing anxiety before it became so prevalent, the amount of testing. I mean, there is some truth to the notion that some students in particular are extremely anxious about testing, and it's difficult for them and they may not do well because of that anxiety. But if you think about it being nonstop as you described, and then the stress level on the child and the teacher and the school, it just seems really over the top, doesn't it?
Over the top, definitely.
Yeah.
Very exaggerated.
So, when you and I talked, you mentioned that while some teachers have the freedom behind closed doors, the district really controls what gets taught. So, can you explain how that works?
Sure. And that's kind of a seesaw that is it goes in different directions depending on whether the district is trying to implement a new, campaign or something like that. And then they want everybody really on the same page, doing the same lesson. And there's seasons of that. And then there's seasons where the district doesn't care as much. And, the person who's in charge is more, open to freedom, teachers having freedom. So then they don't make that mandatory, so then the principals leave it at the teacher's discretion. And again, that's it's a free for all in a sense because you could have wonderful teachers and then you could have teachers who have an agenda. And so, there's it's a double-edged sword in that matter. Um, but when the pendulum swings towards the district having very intense control, which is similar to what I experienced when I was there, um, they basically the district releases a pacing guide, what they call a pacing guide, and it paces out the year uh, to correspond with certain standards that teachers have to cover. And then they the pacing guide can be so intricate as to tell you, which it did for in my case, the exact texts that you have to cover, that you have to read with your students. So I don't have freedom over what texts I'm reading. Um, the exact tests that I have to give, and the tests are linked in this document. Um, and when I give a quiz, when I should be giving a test, when there's all of those district tests and nationally standardized tests that we have to give, so they kind of like account for that. And that again is also a double-edged sword because In a sense, it's good because it creates kind of a standard where everybody is following, and all the schools can be on the same page. And parents, if parents want to know what's happening, they can go ask the district, what are teachers teaching, and then there's a clear document for that. And so it can be helpful. Um, but the other side of that is that if they dictate the texts that you're reading, and then the texts are not so great, then as a teacher, you're stuck teaching them. And so in my case, the curriculum and the pacing was choosing texts that were way above the reading level of most of my students, and yet I was forced to use them. So it created an immense amount of burden on me to explain the text and really actually read it for them, and really coach them in the reading of it, um, to an exhausting level, because it's way, way, way above their level. And then also the content, well, the person in charge of this pacing guide in our particular district, I came to find out is very liberal. And now, while I didn't see anything explicitly pushing the envelope in terms of the LGBT type material, I felt that they purposefully inserted a lot of stories about segregation, in an attempt to make the literature, represent the diverse voices in our society, and the African American story. And while that's absolutely necessary, especially in the South, like that is the African American story, and the African American experience is a huge part of it is segregation. Um, I felt it was not balanced, because you can also put alongside of segregation stories of African Americans who are very successful.
I remember you telling me that it was so predominant that it was like a third, say, of all of your reading assignments were focused on segregation. And you make very good points about, there's other positive stories you could be sharing about African American history. But I believe we dedicate an entire month, the month of February, to African American history as it is. And I think there are some other quote unquote minority races that they're beginning to do focuses on as well. But I have to admit, and you and I talked about critical race theory and LGBTQ and all of that, and we do a lot of interviews about that. And while you can't really pin that down in your experience, this to me sounds a lot like critical race theory, because while it's not openly named that or anything else, it's an attempt to have the child feel oppressed, and oppressed by who? The oppressor is the white man, and then the whole victim mentality, that they're victims. And it just, I know you agree with me, but it just reminded me of that when you talked about, that emphasis. It is definitely a way that they are getting in the critical race theory. I know in the school district where I live in South Carolina, they denied they were teaching critical race theory, but then they developed an entire course called African American Studies. And when I looked at the preparation the teachers did to create the course, they were trained in all of this, Marxist oppressor versus oppressed, and social justice was a word that the teachers used in creating the course. So the goal in the end with these type of courses and focus is, teaching children not only they're a victim, they've been oppressed, somebody's guilty of it, it's causing division, but in addition to that, it's as though they need to do something about it. They're told that these are the problems in the world that you live in, so you should get educated and get out there and change it. And in my opinion, they teach them justice at all costs. And that applies to more than just the race issue. Obviously, I mean, the theme in government schools today, when they're teaching history, is that America is a bad country. We have always oppressed from the very beginning. We started with the quote unquote Native Americans, with that oppression. And so, that's the anti-American indoctrination that's happening. So that applies beyond the race issue. It's across the board. You have to teach the good with the bad. And obviously, history is about learning from the past. So yes, you do have to cover the scars, but you can do so in a way that's uplifting and encouraging students and not pitting them against one another and making them into victims or having a victim mentality.
I wanted to add one other thing about the curriculum. Outside of the curriculum, there is, kids have access to the library in the school. Okay. And usually they have a rotation where they get to go to the library in their school regularly to check out books. And what I want to say is that is really, truly where it's a free-for-all. I mean, the books in there, some of them are just extremely inappropriate for the age group. And I was in a middle school, but some of the books really should have been a high school level or not really there at all. And those books are really at the discretion of the school librarian. And if the school librarian decides, they have a budget of whatever, $3,000 and they're making the choices for the books, then they have access to that. And also, I one time I went with my class to the library and the librarian was talking about some of the books she would recommend to the kids. And she said, one of them, well, this is kind of like a soap opera. There's a transgender blah, blah, blah man, and he's doing this. And then this person murders this person. And, it's not some light reading, haha, and it just revealed to me that like, it's a free-for-all in here and they have access to everything. And then also the district sometimes contracts with online libraries so they give kids access to online libraries through their library card. And then those books are also a free-for-all. Like they have really access to anything and everything. And so, at the elementary level, maybe parents are more aware of what their kids are bringing home in their backpack a little bit, hopefully. But at the middle and high school level, really, most parents, don't necessarily want to look at every book that's coming in their child's backpack, and they don't have time, or they feel like they're old enough to be wise in that regard. But obviously, I mean, it's really like allowing your child to go on the internet and watch anything.
Right. Well, that's interesting. I think that's the first time I've heard about the online access, the access to online libraries, which I'm not surprised because when you were talking about the library, and of course, I know there's still libraries in schools, but it dawned on me, I'm surprised there are still libraries because, there's so much push in education for online curriculum and even the textbooks. I think my last guest that I interviewed talked about textbooks, and I'm just not sure how prevalent textbooks are anymore. Haven't they pretty much shifted a lot to online learning?
For the most part, yes. I mean, we had a workbook this past year. It was a new thing. And I would say workbooks. They still have workbooks, but textbooks that they bring home back and forth, not so much. Those are all online now.
Right, right. That's what I was thinking. Okay, so we need to take a short break, and when we come back, I'd like to shift to something that concerns a lot of parents. And I know it concerns you too, and that's kids' access to the internet. So don't go away. I'll be back with Susan right after this. Who would have ever thought serious adults would be unable to answer, "What is a woman?" Title IX, written to protect girls, has morphed into a tool to shield boys pretending to be girls, putting girls at a disadvantage in sports and at risk in locker rooms. After the sexual revolution of the 60s, young women were taught to discard motherhood in favor of a career. Act more like men, they were told. Today, they're encouraged to become men through drugs and irreversible surgeries. In 2018, Dr. Lisa Littman conducted a study on the rise of rapid onset gender dysphoria, mostly among females, a complex change of cultural norms, and warned that caution is warranted. Caution? U.S. Parents Involved Education believes it's time to act to save our girls. Tune in next week for more insights from U.S. Parents Involved in Education and connect with us at USPI on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org. Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. With me today is Susan, an anonymous educator and private tutor. At least we're calling her Susan. Let's shift to something that concerns a lot of parents, and that's the kids' access to the internet. So you worked with sixth graders, but you say their behavior reflected much older influences. So tell us what you were seeing in that regard.
Absolutely. And, as a parent myself, first, I'm always, that's always a lens that I look at through it, whether I like it or not, forever. For the rest of my life, I'm going to be looking through the lens of a parent. And so, throughout my time there, I just felt that the kids, the things they were saying, the music they were singing, the ways they would spontaneously break out into dance in the class or in the hallway was very sexualized, hypersexualized, uh, and referenced things that were very inappropriate. In fact, there was a recurring joke of referring to P. Diddy, okay, and regarding whatever allegations were, the P. Diddy trial was happening throughout this year. And so they would constantly jokingly refer to baby oil and P. Diddy, and I wondered, what do these kids know about this? What exactly do these kids know about the allegations regarding P. Diddy? And I thought, back in the day, if there was something like a P. Diddy trial, I don't think sixth graders would know about that. I don't think they would, be aware, because that would be something on the late night news, that is not talked about, so commonly. But the reality is, they found out because they have unlimited access to the internet. They all have cell phones. It seems that majority do not have any limits to what they can access, when they can access, how much screen time they get. And it was just very evident because none of them talked about that. Nobody said, "Oh, my mom's taking away my phone," or nobody said, "I'm not allowed to use it past 10 o'clock," or "I'm not allowed to use it after school. I can only use it on the weekends." Nobody. I mean, maybe some of them had those rules. I don't know. I sure hope some of them did, but I didn't hear any of those statements. And I would hear referencing to Snapchat and Instagram and TikTok, all of the things. And you know, social media is a bottomless pit. That's really what it is. And if the algorithm knows you're a young person, well, it feeds you all the things that they know a young person will find shocking, amazing, interesting. And what is that? You know, uh, all the risque stuff. So it was deeply saddening and shocking, and made me feel deeply saddened that really a part of their childhood is taken away. Like they're never gonna have this preteeny innocence back. It's gone. Now they are fully in the mode of a teenager, and they're not. Some of them were not even 12. Um, so on one side, it made me feel very sad. And the other side, I felt, if I had a child who I was trying my best to not give them access to the internet, free for all access to the internet, and create healthy limits and all of those things. But if they're in a school like this, in the public school like this, then they have access to all those kids who have unlimited access, So basically they have access because they talk to each other. They talk to each other, they share information, and so essentially it's really not a safe environment for families who want to have any kind of, you know, boundaries for their children, and I'm a proud mama bear. I refer to myself as a mama bear. When people say, "Oh, you want to shelter your kids?" I'm like, yep, yep. I
Yeah.
want to shelter them. You want them to not know what's going on in the world? Yep, that's it.
Yep.
I don't have a problem with that. So if I were to try to shelter my kids and I put them in that environment, like that's not nonsensical because it wouldn't happen. So um yeah, it's just unfortunate for people who are trying to create limits and healthy boundaries for their kids if they are in an environment like this because it makes it where it's really not happening.
So that leads very conveniently into the next topic we're going to talk about, which is screen time in the classroom. So you've talked about, their devices, their private access, and you've talked about the library access. So what about this topic of screen time in the classroom? You said that it's a double-edged sword. So why is that?
So it is definitely a double-edged sword, and I love technology. Like I'm a technology geek. Okay, I love finding out about new websites and new AI things that are cutting edge and trying to use them in the classroom and all of those things. Um, but the reality is that um, a lot of these technological tools are becoming so amazing, so efficient, so effective, so engaging with kids that they really will be a better tool for me to transfer my knowledge than anything I could say, anything that could come out of my mouth. Okay. And that's the same for all the teachers, right? In every subject, there's amazing science videos, there's amazing math videos, so the problem becomes where, well, we could give them the best, education using these tools, but also they're human beings and they are children and they should not be staring at a screen for a million reasons for their entire school day. And so, but because there's no limits from the district or the state, the state, the district, or the school, um, well, teachers feel like, well, you know what? I'm gonna use what I need to use to get my lesson to be as effective as possible. And you know what? If they're on a screen for very long, it's okay. They're going to the next class. In the middle school and high school setting, I will say, elementary is different because the teacher's with them the whole day, so the teacher is more aware of how much screen time they've had. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so hopefully the teacher is more, cognizant of that. And also naturally in elementary school, the teachers are more concerned about that, hopefully. Whereas middle and high, they really feel like, okay, it's my hour. I get to do whatever I want. And so oftentimes what happens is they go from one class where they're on screens the entire time to the next class where they're on screens the entire time to the next class where they're on screens the entire time, and so on and so forth. And it basically ends up being their whole day they're staring at a screen. Okay. And I will say it
And
is a
then,
double-edged sword because these kids, that's all they've known, right? Some of them are COVID kids. That's really, they were in a incubator of screens. That's all they've ever known. And I saw someone on social media the other day write that children are addicted to screens like a drug. Like when they're not looking at a screen, they are almost like in what is it called when someone's
withdrawals.
withdrawal, exactly. They're having withdrawal symptoms, and I kid you not, that's really what I would see in the classroom, is they're having these withdrawal symptoms because they don't know how to pay attention anymore without a
Right.
screen. They don't know how to engage with something without a screen. without something that's super engaging where they have to be clicking and doing something, and it's flashing across the screen very fast. Um, so so again, it's this double-edged sword because, well, if I want to keep them engaged, I have to show them something on the screen. If I want my lesson to be effective, well, I have to show them something on the screen. But then there's no screen time limits, and they end up being um, on screens the entire day. And they often have homework that's on their Chromebook that they take home, and they have to do it on their Chromebook. And so this issue is really, really inescapable. It's very difficult. I don't know what the solution is, to be honest, because more and more, like even the textbooks, like we were talking about, are virtual. So they don't even have access to their textbooks unless they use their computer.
Right.
So I don't know kind of how this would be regulated, except that maybe at the district level or at a school level, they would have to tell by grade level, your students at your grade level get tops 30 minutes per class or something like that. I don't know, but I've never heard of anybody doing that so far in the middle school or in public schools in general.
Right. Right. So I've known for a very long time, I've been at this for a while, as you know, that doctors, for decades have said, and I say decades, for as long as we've had so much technology, that it's unhealthy for children to have too much screen time. I mean, we know that, and I don't know if they're starting to walk that back, and I wouldn't be surprised if they are, but we've always known that. And so when you think about all of the screen time you just described in the classroom, and then they go home and they're on their phone, they're watching television, so it's like 24/7 nearly. And then, it also caused me to think when you said they have trouble paying attention. Well, then we want to drug them because we find that they're attention deficit disorder, and we want to put them on, some sort of stimulant to fix that problem. And it's a problem that's been created within the system. And two other points I'd like to make that I thought about is that I don't know if you're aware of this, but in Silicon Valley, where all of the big tech people live, they have private schools there that they send our children to that are technology free, kindergarten through eighth grade,
Uh-huh,
no technology.
uh-huh.
And so they're the kind of person that you are probably is really inspired by technology and they're in it and they love it, but they know better than anybody, the effect it will have on their children's learning if they become too dependent on those tools. And then that leads to my final point on this, which is there was a recent MIT study and it hasn't even been published yet, but the lead author of the study thought it was so important because of the way that technology is moving so fast into the AI realm. They did a study on students using AI and writing essays. And it's interesting because the lead author is also very pro technology and pro AI. But she found in the study that the students in the control group that didn't have all the access and were writing their essays the old-fashioned way, that their cognitive abilities were far better. So, and then the cognitive ability of those dependent on AI, I think by the third round of essays, they were just copy and pasting. They weren't even using their head at all. So it's frightening to me. I know AI is a wonderful advancement in technology, but it's probably the double-edged sword that you were talking about. It can also inhibit, I think, learning for children, and I think we need to be very cautious about that moving forward.
Absolutely. And
So when
oh, go ahead.
go ahead.
Well, AI is
Please.
a whole topic in of itself, and honestly, I don't think public schools quite know what to do with it yet. And it's moving at a pace that's so fast that they can't catch up to it, to even making rules or anything about it. So kids are absolutely cheating on everything under the sun using AI, and really teachers have no way to catch them because it's become so sophisticated. Um, but that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
What I wanted to say one other thing about, you were mentioning doctors putting limits on screen time.
Right.
I've done a lot of research on this, especially during the pandemic, because I was trying to advise some of the parents of the kids I was tutoring during the pandemic. And you would be surprised. There's a lot of advice from doctors out there about screen time that kids do at home for fun, like entertainment. But there is very little guidance about educational screen time in schools because nobody
Mm,
wants to touch that dragon
right.
kind of thing, because
Right.
it has implications, if the Pediatric Association of America or whatever comes out and says, really kids under 12 should not have more than 2 hours of screen time, educational screen
Hmm.
time. Well, that puts public schools under scrutiny to implement that. So, and that's a whole, can of worms to implement it. And so I think they are not choosing to be to have any guidance in that manner. Educational screen
Right.
time.
And that doesn't surprise me, and that's why I said I wouldn't be surprised if they're walking that back a little bit. So I guess that's their way of walking it back. So now they're saying it only applies to home entertainment, not schools, which is
Without
not
saying
what they said originally.
Yeah, without saying it so directly, but yes, they only give guidance for, video games at home kind of thing.
Yeah, isn't that something? And that's because all of these industries are interwoven. I was talking about that with my last guest. You've got the huge education industry. I mean, it's a huge industry, and then you've got the people developing the curriculum, which most of it's online now. That's a huge money making industry. And then you've got people like Bill Gates that have a heavy influence into education and are benefiting from the use of technology. He's the one that pushed laptops. I think they made laptops free for students when they first had that push for every child to have a laptop. So yes, all of these big money making industries, in the pharmaceutical industry is another one. They're all interwoven, and there's so much money being spent on government schools, and they all sort of prop each other up, and so the medical community is obviously doing the same. So we need to take another short break, but when we come back, I'd like to ask you about your concerns regarding the hiring of foreign teachers, which was a new one to me. So don't go away. I'll be back with my interview with Susan right after this. A California school district suspended 2 children for 5 days because they quote unquote misgendered a biological male dressed like a girl by calling him he. A Tennessee student received a 3-day suspension for online satirical memes he posted mocking his principal. A New Hampshire teenager is suing his school district after he was suspended from athletics for saying there are only 2 genders. A North Carolina high school student was suspended for 3 days simply for using the term illegal alien. Schools across the country are limiting students' free speech, teaching them by example that free speech no longer exists in America. U.S. Parents Involved in Education's mission is to empower parents to resist the government school's Orwellian attack on free speech. Tune in next week for more insights from U.S. Parents Involved in Education and connect with us at USPI on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org. Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. So you shared with me a major concern from your experience in a South Carolina school district, and that is the hiring of foreign teachers. So please explain this practice and your concerns about it.
Sure. So basically, when it's usually Title I schools that are, in a rough part of town, or, just it's a very remote area or something like that. It's very hard to find qualified teachers, especially now that the wage disparity is growing dramatically. So, you know, um, your average engineer, when he graduates from with a bachelor's degree, now a 4-year bachelor's degree, will graduate and make about 75K a year in any major city or like a Charlotte suburb or something like that. Um, Whereas a teacher with a bachelor's degree graduating will make less than 45,000 in some places. And so it's becoming such a huge disparity, the pay, and also the working conditions are just becoming ridiculous with all the requirements for testing, and just layers upon layers of requirements that the working conditions become really not manageable. And so when they can't find any qualified teacher, the next thing they will hire a long-term substitute who is not somebody with even necessarily a bachelor's degree, to just fill in the gaps for a few weeks till they can find someone. If they can't find someone during that time, well, that long-term sub might stay the rest of the year, or they get a virtual teacher. So they get a virtual teacher that they put on a big screen, and then the person who's just a person in the classroom to manage the students. That's all. They're not teaching in any capacity. They're just managing the virtual experience. Okay, and that can be year after year. Like they could just do that year after year, because now they found a certified teacher somewhere across the world, and not across the world, excuse me, across the US, and they can do that. When they can't even find a virtual teacher, okay, and that goes to show you the level of, they cannot find another human being in a population of 300 million people in America to do this job. It should tell you something. So when they can't even find a virtual teacher, they will hire, they have started hiring now in foreign countries, okay? And when I first started working, I asked the principal, is there some kind of training program for these teachers? Are they being, coached in some way? And I was told yes. What I came to find out is no, they are not being coached in any particular way. They don't have their own, program that they have to attend. They just attend meetings with anybody else who's new to the district. Okay. And what I came to find out is that this was not like an isolated sort of thing. This was like probably, I saw close to 100 teachers in a room. I would say half of them were international teachers. Okay. And that was in one particular meeting. Like it's not like everybody in the district or anything. And so that was very shocking to me, because it made me realize like this is no longer just an isolated sort of approach for when they can't find anybody. No, this is now the go-to thing for when they can't find anybody. Okay. And what I came to realize is a lot of these teachers were from developing countries. Okay. And so they're not developing countries. Well, their education systems and access, unfortunately, is not like ours. So, and I know I'm from a developing country. So to me, it was just shocking that they would bring them over from a developing country and put them straight in the classroom without any training, without any kind of, just explanation of how things work here. And it also shocked me because I worked in multiple states, and I had to take the praxis exam, which is the exam that teachers have to take to teach in different states. And I'm an American citizen. But for them, they don't have to take any praxis exam or any exam at all, really, to come straight from their developing country straight to work here. And so to me, it was just shocking that we'd reached that level. And, while I personally enjoyed working with them, I mean, I had a good relationship with all of them. In fact, some of them I became very close friends with. But it made me realize this is creating a culture where they don't have to solve problems anymore. They don't have to solve the teacher shortage problem because they have unlimited access to labor, an unlimited source of labor. And so they don't have to solve any of the working conditions problems. They don't have to, listen to the teachers really. Um, they can just go get this, like I said, unlimited access to labor. And these people are really wanting to come to America. A lot of them, most of them are. It's a huge opportunity for them. So they really want to be here. They will be your yes man and they won't give you any problems. So I realized, oh, this is actually not only is it a band-aid, no, it's convenient for them because they're going to be a yes man. Whatever they tell them, sure. And so it just creates for not a healthy work environment at all. Not to mention, of course, that they come with their misunderstandings of the culture and sometimes a very heavy accent, and the kids can't understand them, and they can't understand the kids, and it's a learning process. Um, but it's the bigger issue is really it creates a culture where they don't have to deal with the working conditions at all. They can just hire somebody who really wants to be here.
Well, you made some good points about the working conditions. I mean, I think the working conditions must be just reprehensible, especially in the district that you worked in that Title I school. From what you described to me, so many issues that are just very concerning. Um, I, I would disagree with you on one point, if you don't mind, is that the teacher pay issue, and I know we hear a lot about teacher pay, and my son is an electrical engineer with a 4-year degree, and he does make very good money and started out good. But I think his job is a lot different than a teacher's job as far as, how many days a year he works. And in my opinion, we're getting further and further away from, and you've described this yourself, really having a teacher in the classroom. Really, teachers have been relegated to facilitators in these virtual curriculum. And I mean, why do you need a 4-year degree to babysit children? I mean, and I don't mean that in any offense at all, because I know you're the kind of teacher that wants to have the freedom to really teach children. You have a heart for that. And I know there's a few like you, but of course, you're not going back into the system because of the problems. And so many, the good teachers that feel like you are leaving the system. And I don't think it's because of a lack of pay so much. I really think it has more to do with the working conditions like you described, and not wanting to go along with the indoctrination and the unbalanced teaching and the LGBTQ stuff in the libraries. And they're just morally against that approach. So yeah, I did just want to follow up on that. And then I sure you want to respond.
Sure. Yeah, I think that, not the people who go into education, surely their goal is not to be, a facilitator. I think anybody who goes into education, they know it's hard work, and usually they do it for the love of the kids, naively. Only for the love of the kids. And I remember when I went into teaching, all of my family told me, "Don't do it. Don't do it. You're not going to get paid well." And I was like, I love it. Like, I can't help it almost. Um, and so I think that certainly I don't think people go in wanting to be a facilitator. I think the facilitator idea is a result of actually too much regulation and regulating testing, and that trickles down from the state to the districts to the schools, and where teachers are essentially stripped of their capacity to be creative and do what the kids, what they feel the kids need, and they have to just follow the curriculum or do the test or do the whatever. So I would say that just not that it's not happening, sadly, that teachers are becoming almost like facilitators, but I wouldn't say that it's the teacher's choice. I think that it's truly the choice of the higher ups, basically.
I'm sure that's true. Absolutely. That was very well said. So, another topic that I wanted to talk with you about that you shared with me, and I can tell you that when we talked about this, I think this was one of the most disturbing things, and I think it probably is, correct me if I'm wrong, one of the things that led you to not continue your career in government school teaching, but also prompted you to be incognito in this interview is the violence. So we've described the fact that you were working all last year in a low income district in South Carolina. And so I want you to tell us a little bit about the violence in the schools that you witnessed, even just in the middle school with sixth graders, and even the community violence, which is such a problem, and why you feared being known on this interview.
I mean, I chose to be anonymous just to be clear, just in general to, out of, I just would like that privacy. But what I want to say is, the community and the school I was in, it was a very particular thing, that is not necessarily it was not reflective necessarily of even the rest of the district. Okay, so and that's the case across a lot of the U.S. You could have a very large area, large county. Part of the county is very poor, part of the county is very rich. And the schools in those two, in the different areas are vastly different. They have vastly different day-to-day experiences, you could say. Um, so I had taught in Title I schools before, low income. I knew it would be rough, and I truly went in with an attitude of service. Like, this is my community, and I want to serve, and I want to take on this challenge. I want to love these kids. I want to show them respect that they have not necessarily been shown before, regularly, and I want to do the hard thing. Okay, if that makes sense. Um, so, I was going into it knowing it would be rough, and knowing there would be fights that break out, and knowing that, the kids are going to curse me out from time to time, and knowing that, they're rough around the edges. That's their background. They grew up in extreme poverty, broken homes. How else are they going to respond? So, so I think that I was not shocked by any of that. What I was shocked by was the response of the district and those in charge. And so the adults in the room were not acting like adults, basically. Um, and essentially the protocols that were supposed to be in place to support a school like that in a community like that were not existent and not really functional. And everybody kind of knew it, and they kind of played along, and they kind of just brushed it along. That's the word. So, so to me, it's an issue of protocols that were not there, and an issue of the people who are in charge, who are, see that this enormous need and act like, no, it's just like any other school. We should just act, stuff them 30 in a class like any other school. Um, and so, um, yeah, there was regular um, aggressive fights. The protocol for how these kids are supposed to be pulled out of the class, and the severity of punishment, whether they're suspended in school or out of school, or they are sent home, or any of that was not very clear at all. Okay, and oftentimes they were just sent right back to class. And so when that happens, obviously kids pick up on lack of rules, and things get worse. And so it was really a situation where I was constantly on edge and in a kind of fight or flight mode, because a fight could break out at any given minute because somebody looked at somebody weird, or in a bad way, or somebody said something under their breath, or because they are hot-headed middle schoolers. And a fight could break out any second. So I was really it created in me, I would say, even after having left, a sense of PTSD, of I'm on edge because anything could happen any minute, and I'm responsible for the safety of these kids. Um, so, uh, sadly, it comes down to protocols that are not supporting the great need that there is.
I'd like to comment on the scenario that you painted in this particular community. So you talked about extreme poverty, and that's what Title I schools, that's what we usually call them because they receive more federal funding from Title I because they're not as affluent as other school districts. So extreme poverty is obvious, and then you mentioned broken homes as well. So I was just thinking a little bit about that after you said it, and I think that the second point is probably more important than the first because I think that kids can grow up in poverty and still do well. But if they don't have a strong family structure, if they're being raised by their mother or their aunt or their grandmother, and there's no father in the home, there's no family cohesiveness. I mean, the social sciences are clear that children that are raised in single parent households do not fare as well as their peers that are in married parent households by every measure of well being, including education. So I just think I just wanted to kind of bring that point in. And so uh, finally, let's talk about the literacy levels in the sixth grade classroom from last year. And so, if you would share with our audience what it is you observed.
With the literacy levels, I was shocked and saddened to find out that most kids were reading significantly below grade level, and I mean two, not just two, sometimes 3 and 4 years behind grade level. And while some of them had IEPs, which means that they were red flagged in the system somewhere along their education, and they got into the special education world, some of them did not have IEPs, which means that they got to that grade without anybody red flagging them in the system. And so that was even more disturbing for me because I'm like, how did you get here? How did you get to me without anybody red flagging you in the system to get additional support? And what I realized is that unfortunately there was a culture, and this was district wide, what I came to find out, of just moving kids along, graduating kids that shouldn't be graduated, you know, moving kids from one grade level to another. And basically nobody's retained. Nobody. Like it's extremely rare for anybody to be retained. And so because of COVID and because of all the additional you know the fact that they're low income and the fact that there's no support in their home and all the other factors, the kids were severely behind and there is no support. And even within special education there's a cap. Even once they get an IEP, okay, they got an IEP, there's only so many accommodations they could get with that. And so even with that, it was just an impossible task to get them on grade level. But at the same time, I was not even allowed to work at their level. Okay, I was given a curriculum with specific texts, with specific questions, with specific tests that I had to give. And so I wasn't able to meet them at their level. And there's an expression in the education world called meeting a child in their zone of proximal development. And that means they're kind of just right level. Okay. And so when you can't meet a child in their zone of proximal development, that means you're teaching too high above their level or too low. And essentially, I was having to teach way, way, way too high above their level the entire time. And there's nothing I can do about that. So it was a lot of kind of failure, recurring failure. They would fail the tests, they would fail the quizzes, they would and this constant frustration and, okay, we're moving along, we have to move along because this is, the pacing guide says we're supposed to be doing this. And so, and in, the obsession with data and testing, there's a big kind of umbrella saying that they will say that, that data should inform your teaching. Okay. The data should tell you what to teach, but that wasn't really the case. The case was, this is what you're teaching, whether they learned it or not. Move on.
Wow. That sounds extremely frustrating, and I can understand how you gave up. It's unfortunate you had to give up because you're exactly the kind of teacher that those children need. If you had just been free to do what it was you knew that they needed and had the support to do it. So I want to thank you, for coming on the podcast and blowing the whistle on these issues. Like I said, these aren't the issues we typically talk about, but these issues are equally important. And again, I think it's part of the reason we're losing good teachers like you. So I really appreciate you. I appreciate you doing this. And I think it's just been an incredibly eye-opening experience. So thanks for sharing your firsthand experience and giving parents and taxpayers an inside look at what's happening inside government schools. So we close each episode by asking my guests 2 questions. What concerns you most about what's happening in education today, and what gives you hope?
What I would say, what concerns me most is that there are huge pockets of our society that are stuck in this system and they can't escape because, well, they're single parents or, they just can't afford to leave and go to a private school or homeschool or whatever. It's not an option. And so that to me, those people and those are the faces of my students that I knew were low, coming from low income homes. Those are the people that I felt like I need to fight for them because they're stuck here. They don't have a choice. I could homeschool my children, but they're never going to be homeschooled, or they're never going to get a chance to go to a private school or exit this system. So that to me is my greatest heartbreak and the reason why I want to still voice some of these concerns and help to get real change to happen. And I would say my hope is really first and foremost in God, that God is sovereign over all of this mess, even, when he sees the messiness of humanity, he's sovereign. He always has been and always will be. But also just the technology and things like your podcast that is transferring information to people that, maybe hadn't heard about what's happening. That is what gets people to re-examine things. And that's what gets people to really think about changing their choices for their own children's education or, making, finding ways to make an impact in their community in different ways. So really, it's encouraging to see more things like your podcast and people sharing their experiences and so forth on the internet and opening people's eyes.
Well, that's encouraging to me. I appreciate being a part of your hope, and that's wonderful. And I really appreciate you, and you're a part of my hope as well. Thanks again for coming on the show, and thank you to our viewers for tuning in to Unmasking Government Schools with Sherry Few. If this episode encouraged you or challenged you, please consider sharing it with a friend, and be sure to visit uspie.org to learn more and join the movement. See you next time.
U.S. Parents Involved in Education is a nonprofit coalition dedicated to restoring local control of education and parental authority. By empowering parents to reclaim responsibility for their children's learning and encouraging states to move away from federal influence, U.S. PI seeks to create a culture where parents are the primary decision makers in education and schools support families without the burden of federal mandates. If you want to start a state or regional U.S. PI chapter in your area, please visit uspie.org and complete the brief questionnaire in the chapter section.